I've got 24 of these to do, so I'm going to just cut to hammer time. The fretboard binding is now glued up. I forgot to press record on the camera and I've started trimming up the binding. I'm getting on with this end here now. So I'm just planing it down close to the fretboard. And then I'll do the final trimming up with a sanding block. I've also started putting together the end piece for the binding. Now, normally you'd use a longer piece of the binding from here to go across here, but I quite like to use the offcuts from the end of the fretboard because the grain follows then. You do get end grain on the end of your fretboard, but it's glued in place and it's all quite well protected. It just kind of follows through the theme for me quite nicely. So I've glued a piece of veneer onto the inside of it here and I've chamfered these edges, so I need to cut the mitre in here to fit this again. Obviously the neck is slightly in my way at the moment, but I've been gluing in the headstock inlay and I've been using super glue and kind of letting it pull in the gaps, which means I've got to keep it flat. So it's currently clamps down on my workbench and I'm having to work around it. And there we are. So I'll put a bit of masking tape under here, which will catch the glue. I've planed the binding on this and sanded it all and got it to the right dimensions now. So we've got to attach the LEDs in here. So I think it's going to be quite a lot of fiddling around, gluing, sticking and hoping for the best. So basically I'm just going to put the lights back in where they go, glue them in place, and then I'm going to have to glue down the wires, just make sure everything's sat perfectly flush so that nothing interferes with the fretboard being glued to the neck. What I might actually do first is fasten some flexible wires onto the end here, just so I can run those through the neck to wherever I need them to be. So I need my soldering iron for that. that's sanded, we're going to give it a quick test, because we like to test it every time we do anything, and that looks bloody brilliant. What I'm going to do with this fretboard is I'm actually going to glue it onto another veneer, which will work in a couple of ways. It will absorb a fraction of a millimetre of any unevenness that might be from the wiring in the back. I've got it pretty close, I can't feel anything, but if there's a hundredth of a millimetre sticking out, this veneer will flex with that, and it'll give me the space to sand it perfectly flat on the back again. It'll also highlight the edge of the fingerboard against the neck, which will look really nice. I haven't done this since one of my very first builds actually, which looked stunning, and it's still out there somewhere. But essentially I've got the holes for the wires down here. I've put a veneer on this board already, ready to go, and drilled the wires for the holes to go through. So all I need to do is get some glue on here and get it clamped in place. Trimmed off the excess veneer under the binding, and I've sanded it all back. I've sanded the surface of the fretboard down to 800 grit, so we've got a nice smooth space there. I've been regularly checking and testing to make sure that my wiring isn't compromised in any way, so we still light up. I've kept the board that I used for gluing up the veneer, because it's got the holes in to feed the wires, and I've actually stuck the fretboard down. I've decided I'm going to fret the board before it goes on the neck, just so that if anything does happen, I'm at a position where I can start again without having to remove the fretboard from the neck to do it all. So it's not necessarily the most ideal way of doing it, but I'm trying to kind of work around and save myself as much pain as possible if something does go wrong. So what I need to do first is clean out my fret slots, make sure I've got no glue or anything stuck in there, and then I'm going to file a little groove, or a little chamfer, sorry, on the top of each slot, just so it takes the fret wire a bit easier and it doesn't chip out as much if it ever needs a refret. And then we'll start putting some frets and get them in. Well, I've cleaned out and beveled all the slots. I need to get some fret wire cut. I've got this roll of fret wire that I tend to buy it in a roll and then radius the whole thing, just tighten it up a little bit. Since I'm using a 12-inch radius on most of my fretboards at the minute, because it's quite comfortable and it's just what I'm used to. Whereas the radius on this is 7 to 8 inches, so it's a bit tighter, which means it'll be higher in the middle and it'll spread as I hammer it in, digging the ends in deeper and obviously locking it nice and tight in place. So what I need to do is cut all of this down to individual lengths. I made a block a few years ago with some holes and numbers in it, which just makes my life a little bit easier. I've knocked it over a few times whilst I've been doing this job in the past, and it's a pain, so I'm going to try really hard not to do that. All 24 frets are cut.
Because I've got binding on this fretboard, I need to remove some of the tang on the fret wire to sit inside the binding and sit in the slot. I haven't got any fret tang nippers. I'm in the market for some, so if anybody's got any suggestions of which ones are good, which ones might work, and which ones aren't going to cost me an arm and a leg, because I'm a poor, struggling guitar builder, I don't have that much money. I'd quite like suggestions in the comments. But for now, I'm going to use these, and I'm just going to work my way along, and then I'll probably give them a quick file to smooth off what's left, and then we're going to hammer them all in. I've got 24 of these to do, so I'm going to just cut to hammer time. It's hammer time. So I've got all my frets cut down and the tangs trimmed. I've got some glue to put in the fret slots. I've got some water and some kitchen roll to give it a quick wipe with once I'm done. Clean up the fretboard. And my standard piece of scrap veneer to spread the glue with. So here we go. In case you're wondering what this is, I made this a few years ago for helping to reseat loose frets. It's essentially just a lump of brass that I've filed the ends down, and I've ground a little groove that sits comfortably on top of the fret. Essentially, if I tap this on the fret and work my way out from the middle to the edge, it just focuses the force of the hammer where I want it to be, and helps just reseat it properly. Before I attach the fretboard, I'm going to file all of these fret ends flush with the binding, just so I don't cut myself, because if I don't do it now, I'm guaranteed to draw blood. So I'm almost ready to glue on the fretboard. But first, I need to connect these wires together and run these through the neck somehow. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, carefully figure out where we sit with these wires. So I've got the end of the fretboard up against the line where my nut's going to be. Got a pencil here. There we go. So I've marked where I'm going to need to drill for the wires. I'm just going to put a hole straight through this neck blank, because it's not really going to lose any strength. It's inside the glue joint, and it just puts the wires straight down through the neck, out of the way, and then I can cut a channel down here to route them wherever I need later on. This side I'll do afterwards. Well, it's a 4mm hole, and I've just used a stepped drill bit to extend this side slightly, just to make it a little bit wider up here to make it easier to feed the wires through. And now we'll test it to make sure that they go comfortably. That looks perfect. Yep, no issues there. That is spot on. So now what I need to do is trim and solder these wires together. Now for the incredibly fiddly bit of working with very short wires on two pieces of wood that want to move. In theory, if everything's worked, both the fretboard and the headstock should light up. Spot on. Whilst we've got the glue out, I'm going to get the body put together. So I've made a load of spool clamps because I didn't have any. These are probably going to be the best things to attach the body together just because of the shape. I could use my vacuum bag, but because it's hollow, I don't want to put too much pressure on the hollow areas, because the last thing I want now is to over clamp it and crack the top or the back. So I'm going to use these around the edge, and we'll get this clamped up.